Lecture 9, Tips for Online Learning. Online learning really shot to the forefront of national conversation in 2020. As the COVID-19 pandemic struck, public schools and institutes of higher education across America scrambled to respond. Many chose not to resume in-person instruction due to the public health risks, and the rather abrupt and sudden shift to online learning presented many challenges for teachers and students of all ages who subsequently scrambled to prepare and to adjust to the new format. But it's important to realize that even before the pandemic, the trend of online learning was gaining momentum. According to the National Center for Education Statistics, in the U.S., in 2012, there were nearly 3 million students at degree-granting post-secondary institutions enrolled in at least one distance education course. By the fall of 2018, just 6 years later, that number had jumped to nearly 7 million students. And that doesn't include the number of students and professionals enrolled in courses through non-degree granting institutions. We've also seen more and more companies using e-learning tools for online trainings and professional development. In 2017, approximately 77% of U.S. corporations use some degree of online learning for employee development and training. And that number is believed to be over 90% now. People engage in online learning for a variety of reasons, including career progression, changing careers, college preparation, continuing education, lifelong learning, and corporate training. You might ask, why are we seeing these trends? Outside of a worldwide health pandemic, why the significant growth in online education? I'd suggest there are at least 4 major benefits. First and foremost is convenience. Online courses offer flexibility, both in timing and often, but not always, self-pacing. Many learners are simultaneously balancing work and family obligations and can't commit to full-time or in-person programs with strict meeting times. The flexibility of online courses allows people the opportunity to learn and grow without having to put professional or personal obligations on hold. In addition, courses that are self-paced allow you to work through the material at your own rate, which increases the likelihood that you can master the content and ultimately get more out of the course. The second benefit of online learning is that it enables you to connect with leading experts in virtually any field across the world. You no longer have to move physical locations in order to take classes from major leaders. All you need is a computer and an internet connection. Third, on a related note, online classes also provide far-reaching opportunities for increased communication and collaboration. You can connect with people across the globe, which increases the likelihood that you develop a broader and more global perspective and may also contribute to heightened creativity and innovation. It's also a great alternative for those of us who are perhaps a little more reserved or shy when it comes to in-person interactions. And last but not least, online courses are beneficial because they give us practice with new technological skills and allow us to expand our skill sets. As part of online coursework, you'll be exposed to new digital learning materials, and you'll likely use new communication tools and content management software. Inevitably, you'll also gain invaluable experience troubleshooting problems and overcoming errors. So you could argue that not only do online courses provide convenience, but they also help us develop technical skills that are increasingly necessary in modern life. However, as so many people learned during the pandemic, all of these benefits also come with some unique challenges. For example, with flexibility in timing and pacing comes the need to be more self-motivated, self-disciplined, and organized. You won't always have someone pushing you to move forward, and the lack of face-to-face interaction means there's generally less pressure to actually follow through. Though you may be paying for the course and feel a sense of obligation in that regard, it's often easier to fall through the cracks, and research suggests that dropout rates are somewhat between 10 to 20% higher for online courses compared to in-person courses. Another challenge associated with online learning is that increased opportunities for connection and collaboration are paired with the need to learn and adapt to new communication tools. And this, of course, often necessitates a willingness to step outside your comfort zone to fully engage in a virtual format. The third and final challenge I'd point to is this. Learning to use new tech tools and software requires a certain amount of patience, time, aptitude, and persistence. Sometimes the hardest part of an online course is simply getting situated and knowing where to find the content and how to use the features. With an ever-expanding array of apps available to instructors and course designers, Sometimes there's pressure for them to include more features that end up sacrificing convenience and making it harder for people to learn. As a course reviewer, I've seen some online courses where the users spent nearly as much time and effort learning to use the tools as they did engaging with the content. That's not good course design. As learners, you don't usually have control over that issue, but it's still an important consideration when it comes to planning for your own success. So what can you do to navigate or otherwise minimize these challenges? There are a host of things that instructors and content developers can do to enhance the online learning experience. Unfortunately, many of those decisions are made long before a student ever sets a figurative foot in the online classroom. You won't be able to control whether the course itself is designed with best practices in mind. However, as learners, there are many strategies you can employ to increase the likelihood of your own success and to maximize your learning in online environments. Because it's easier to think in terms of lists, I'm going to divide my recommendations into 5 major categories. 1. Know the tech requirements in advance. 2. Pay attention to the overarching course expectations. 3. Make a plan for how and when you will do the work. 4. Create a workspace that is conducive to learning. And 5. Engage in ways that promote long-term learning. So let's start with the first 2 recommendations, both of which involve assessing the requirements of the course, both technical and content-based. One of the most important things you can do before embarking on any online learning experience is to get the lay of the land. In other words, before you actually engage with the content, you'll want to get a sense of the big picture. This means familiarizing yourself with the tech requirements. It might go without saying, but the first thing you'll want to do is ensure that you have the right equipment for the course. In most cases, almost any computer with internet access, word processing software, and a video player will suffice. However, some courses may require you to download special apps or purchase headsets, printers, or more advanced hardware and software. For example, if you're taking a course in graphic design, you may need to upgrade to a higher quality graphics card for your computer, and/or you may need to install special editing programs, both of which may also require additional memory. In general, you should not plan to rely on a smartphone for your coursework, as most online courses are not fully mobile compatible or integrated. Further, to avoid interruptions, reliable internet is a must-have. Unreliable internet connections can cause you to miss out on key information and participation opportunities, and may also interfere with completing assignments, such as presentations or quizzes. Not to mention that frequent interruptions are incredibly frustrating and can also disrupt the learning process. Imagine for a minute being in the middle of an engaging lecture or discussion only to have the internet suddenly freeze. You frantically try to figure out what happened and troubleshoot to reconnect, and by the time you do reconnect, you've either missed a critical detail and are totally lost, or otherwise discover that the event has already ended. Internet problems can waste both your time and resources. So if you don't have a reliable connection at home, you should consider accessing Wi-Fi at a local library, coffee shop, or similar public space. Just make sure they're agreeable to your use. Many businesses offer free Wi-Fi, but expect you to pay for other services. Similarly, depending upon your reason for taking an online course, your employer may or may not support you using office-based resources for that purpose. Other options to enhance internet connection are using hotspot signal boosters to improve wireless connections, or avoiding wireless issues altogether by using a desktop computer that's wired to a modem. Of course, some outages will be unexpected and out of your control, but it's beneficial to be proactive about otherwise ensuring that you'll have internet access when you need it. One more tip in that regard, if you're enrolled in a structured class that has scheduled participation requirements, you should generally avoid planning an exotic vacation or a trip to a secluded cabin at the same time. Once you're sure that you have the right tech requirements, you'll want to explore the tech features of the online course itself. If possible, log into the learning platform early, look around, practice clicking on links and tools, and try to get comfortable with the overall layout. Ensure that you know where to find the content and the tools that you'll be using. If your class uses an online meeting platform, such as Zoom or WebEx, explore the features to get a sense of how they work. If you'll be submitting discussion posts or Dropbox assignments, practice submitting something and make sure it went through. And by the way, I know this sounds like a lot of work, and it is. Online learners essentially have double the responsibilities of face-to-face learners in that you have to learn the course system and the course content. If you're lucky, The instructor will build in some tutorials and possibly assignments that acquaint you with those key tools. But even if she doesn't, it's a good idea to test everything yourself. At the very least, try not to wait until the last minute to try them out. Give yourself a little buffer time to troubleshoot potential problems on the days that you need to use a new tool or feature. Once you understand and can successfully navigate the technical features of the course, the next step is to review the actual course content requirements and expectations. Remember that online courses are often more convenient, but they're not inherently easier or any less rigorous than face-to-face courses. And you often lose the benefit of having an instructor there to patiently walk you through each expectation as they might do in a traditional classroom setting. As such, before registration, or at least before diving in and starting assignments, you should review the overarching course outline, structure, and syllabus as soon as they're available. You'll also want to reflect on how the course expectations fit with your other life responsibilities and engagements. For example, how much time will you likely need to dedicate to the course itself? Many courses will come with an estimation of the required time per module, hours per week, or total time commitment to the course itself. Though the actual time commitment will vary based on various factors, including your baseline familiarity with the content, you should plan for the maximum. Can you reasonably expect to dedicate that much time to working on the course? If not, then you should consider enrolling at a later date for the sake of your performance and learning. You should also consider how much flexibility is afforded in the timing of participation and in the pace of learning. Some online courses are synchronous, meaning that you are expected to be virtually present at specific live times for lectures, discussions, or other activities. On the other hand, some online courses are asynchronous, meaning there are no set or required live meeting times. However, it's also important to realize that asynchronous may or may not mean self-paced. Even if there are no specific times when you must be present, you might still be expected to follow a particular timeline when it comes to completing course activities. For instance, you might have assignments due each week, or it may be that certain modules must be completed by specific dates. It is possible, though unlikely, that the online course could be completely open-ended, or that it would only have a single end date by which everything must be completed. On the surface, that would seem like the most desirable option, since it maximizes learners' freedom and autonomy for completing the work on their own schedule. But it's not a best practice because, as it turns out, scaffolding students' workload tends to be more beneficial to their learning. Having structured due dates limits opportunities for procrastination and increases the likelihood that learners receive timely feedback, which can be useful in monitoring and regulating their overall performance in the course. Lastly, some institutions are increasingly using hybrid or blended models for learning, meaning that a certain percentage of the course is online and some of it is also conducted in person. In those cases, it's important to get a clear sense of exactly what will happen or what is expected inside and outside of class. For example, will the in-person sessions be teacher-directed and lecture-based? Or will it be more of a flipped model where the learner essentially watches videos and otherwise engages with the content outside of class and then is expected to actively discuss the content during the live session? Both versions have different implications when it comes to preparation and participation. So, once you've thought about how much time you'll need to dedicate to the course and gotten a good sense of the flexibility and pacing associated with it, you next need to ask 3 important questions. What are the requirements for participation in the course? How many assignments are you expected to complete? And what is the nature of those assignments? Every course will be different. Some may have just a couple major assignments, whereas others may have a large number of smaller assignments. Instructors may or may not require collaboration with other students, and they may assign other activities that require additional prep work or travel, such as visiting the library or interviewing someone. Don't shy away from courses just because they have assignments that appear to be challenging or that may be outside of your comfort zone. But try to gauge whether the assignments and the overall workload will be manageable based on your unique schedule and obligations. Are you still with me? Once you have a good idea of what the course entails and how it will proceed, the next step is to make a plan for how and when you will work on the course. As I mentioned before, one of the greatest features of online courses is also one of the most dangerous, and that's the overall flexibility they provide with timing and pacing. Compared to a face-to-face course where you have a given, dedicated time and space to work on the course, you are necessarily expected to do more independent work with an online course. So if you're not careful or self-disciplined, it will be easier to lose focus and or to fall behind. If you're anything like me, you may find yourself procrastinating and prioritizing other things. One of my favorite quotes, usually attributed to Mark Twain, is, "Never put off till tomorrow what you can do the day after tomorrow." Life is busy, and if you don't proactively reserve time to work on the course, your schedule will easily fill with other obligations and diversions. It's amazing how urgent the need to do laundry becomes when you're putting off other tasks. So, consider all of your obligations, including work obligations, hobbies, family time, self-care time, housework, etc., and try to identify some specific days and times that you can dedicate to the course. In other words, treat it as if you actually do have a set class period to attend. Don't try to cram everything into a single day or work session. As I've noted repeatedly in other lectures, our brains can only handle so much information at once. If you want to minimize your stress levels and increase retention, try to divide your work time into 3 to 5 sessions spaced throughout the week. And if possible, try to keep that schedule consistent from week to week. The more consistent your schedule, the easier it is to get into a groove or a routine, and the easier it is to figure out when you need to make adjustments. If your schedule is constantly changing, you're more likely to miss or forget assignments, and it will be harder to consistently monitor your progress. In an online course, you don't have the luxury of regularly seeing your instructor and relying on them or your classmates for in-person reminders. So make sure you pay close attention to the course schedule and refer to the syllabus, schedule, and instructions frequently throughout the course. I recommend that you print and hang a copy of the schedule right by your workspace, or enter all the key due dates into your own personal planner. However you do it, just ensure that it's easily accessible and that you're referring to it often. Also, remember that course schedules are almost always subject to change, so it's a good idea to routinely log into the course platform to look for any announcements of changes. Some e-learning platforms will also enable you to sign up for email or text alerts anytime an assignment is posted or updated, or if your instructor posts an announcement. If you aren't subscribed to receive such alerts, then it's especially important that you log into the course regularly to check for those updates. Also within the realm of planning, depending on how the course is organized, for each week or work session, you should make a to-do list of everything you need to complete. For major assignments, or those with multiple components, start with the final due dates and work backwards, setting intermediate goals. For example, if you have a term paper that's due at the end of the month, you might give yourself a draft deadline for a week earlier, an outline deadline for a week before that, and maybe a reading deadline for a week before that. Again, just like with spacing out your work sessions, the idea is to break down any large assignments into smaller, more manageable components so that you don't feel overly stressed and so that you have adequate time to think, review, and revise. At this point, I want to acknowledge that planning is a pretty important step, but of course, making yourself adhere to those plans and holding yourself accountable to them is another issue altogether. For that, I'd refer you to the other lectures in this series, in particular those on self-regulation and motivation. In the meantime, let's transition next to the key workspace considerations. Set up a dedicated learning environment or find a location where you can work with minimal distractions. Whether your workspace is at a desk, kitchen table, coffee shop, or library, find what works best for you. Personally, I can't work at a coffee shop because I get way too engrossed in people watching, and the smells and the sounds, they all signal lounge mode for me. I need a quiet, private space where I can focus. But I know others who are super productive working in a coffee shop setting because the hustle and bustle of other people creates a sort of white noise for them. So find what works best for you and try to make a habit of working in that same space. Just like having a set schedule, the consistency will help you get into a routine, both physically and mentally. One word of caution, though. Even though online learning offers you the ability to learn from home, maybe even while in your PJs, don't make the mistake of getting overly comfortable. Some studies have shown that simply making a point of dressing more formally can help you feel more focused and potentially improve your performance. Similarly, you'll want to avoid working in your bedroom since your brain associates it as a place for rest. It might be harder to fight the urge to relax or even doze off. On the flip side, working in your bedroom may also make it harder to sleep during non-work hours if your brain starts to associate it with productivity. And focus on one thing at a time. Don't try to multitask. I've already debunked the myth of multitasking in another lecture, but learning requires mental effort and undivided attention. Rather than saving time, efforts to multitask usually end up costing time, increasing the likelihood of mistakes and sapping our energy. It's much better to focus on one task at a time and, unless necessary, don't try to simultaneously monitor email and text messages either. Silence your phone, log out of social media, and close email so that you aren't distracted by notifications and messages. So far, we've covered 4 of my 5 recommendations for maximizing online learning. 1, know the tech requirements in advance. 2, pay attention to the overarching course expectations. 3, make a plan for how and when you will do the work. And 4, create a workspace that is conducive to learning. Which brings us to my 5th recommendation. Engage in ways that promote long-term learning. People enroll in online courses for a variety of reasons, sometimes purely out of interest, sometimes for continuing education or professional development, and sometimes to complete program requirements. You may have very different motives and levels of interest in the content of the course itself. Whatever the reason you find yourself in an online course, you might as well make it worth your time by taking it seriously and treating it as a real learning opportunity. Among other things, this means that you should actively engage in virtual discussions about the content. Display curiosity in these discussions and ask for clarification when needed. You should also try to make connections between the content you're learning and your own life. Try to apply it outside of the course or start a conversation with a friend about what you're learning. And if the personal connections are too hard to see, at least try to think of the learning experience as something akin to cross-training for your mind. Engaging in different types of thinking will strengthen your brain muscles and may prepare you for learning and performing in other contexts in ways that are not always obvious. Another important part of engagement involves staying in contact with your instructor. When possible, the more you try to form a personal connection to your instructor, the more they will be invested in your learning, and the more accountable you will feel to the course. Though the idea of staying relatively anonymous and behind the scenes might sound good in theory, you're more likely to get something out of the course if you forge a connection with your instructor. And who knows, they may be able to provide you with additional professional resources or opportunities, or they could potentially serve as a future job or program reference in your field. Classmates can also be a valuable resource when it comes to networking, studying, and holding yourself accountable. Finally, one mistake that students in an online course make is that they don't bother to take notes on the material as they would in their face-to-face courses. There are several different strategies for note-taking, which I described in another lecture, but the overall process is important because it helps you organize the content in a meaningful way, and it gives you practice paraphrasing and explaining ideas. So don't skip it. In addition to recording basic ideas, as you engage with the content, you should also make a point of writing down ideas or examples that really resonate with you, personal examples you thought of, and questions for follow-up. In sum, I hope this lecture has given you some sense of the challenges of online learning, but also the ways that you can successfully tackle them. You might be new to online education, and it might be difficult at first, but it's a myth that some people are just not good at online learning. Anyone can be successful in an online course with the right attitude and the right strategies. It may require an adjustment from your typical behaviors, but the more you apply the strategies I've discussed today, the more likely you can turn any online learning experience into a positive and meaningful one.